we have today two very important persons who I'm going to call to the stage. The first one is Professor Antje Boetius, who is Professor of Microbiology at the Max Planck Institute of Marine Microbiology. So as you can guess, Antje does her research on the oceans and on the polar regions, very, very connected to what Johan is doing and what he's being recognized for here. And Antje is also the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board to PIC. And then, of course, I want to introduce, everybody knows Johan, our 88th Tyler Prize laureate, who is well known here in Potsdam, in Germany, in Europe, and frankly, all over the world. So again, he could have selected to be recognized very, very far away, and we're all very happy to be here. So I'll just say, I'm not going to run through your whole biography, but I think I first met you, Johan, when you were director of the Stockholm Environment Institute. We've been working together in parallel streams for a long time. And then you were, of course, the director of the Stockholm Resilience Center, and then the Institute. And again, I could go on, but I'm not going to, because we are here to listen to this conversation with the Tyler Prize laureate. I just want to tell you that this conversation will be filmed and then will be streamed all over the world in about a week or so. So what you're saying is being listened to here, but it will be listened to the whole world. So welcome to the stage, Antje and Johan, and we're looking forward to listening to your conversation.
Okay. Are you sitting well, Johan?
Very well.
You feel relaxed. Very good. Yeah, the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement. First of all, my deep congratulations. That is really something, especially when one looks into the list of previous recipients. And as a critical friend, I may start with the question, when one thinks about it, you get this fantastic award for saving our brother and sister great ape species, for fixing fisheries economies, for predicting the role epidemics will play. But your achievement is telling humans to respect a limit, a boundary, and we don't like to hear that well. So what exactly is the achievement in your words?
Yeah, thanks, Antje, and it's wonderful to be here. Quite overwhelming, actually, and I just really want to start by emphasizing that this prize is a manifestation of planetary boundary science going mainstream, thanks to many of you in this room. That this is really a collective effort of turning a corner and then moving towards making planetary stewardship the pathway towards prosperity and equity for humanity. Now, the planetary boundary framework, the question is what's new with setting scientifically based limits? And I will quite strongly argue, actually, that it is new. And the novelty is, I mean, we've had, as you all remember, the limits to growth in the 1972 Club of Rome report, amazing work with the World 3 model of MIT. The difference here is that those initiatives, like the limits to growth, like the ecological footprints, like the ecological carrying capacity initiatives, even like the half-Earth work of the fantastic ecologist E.O. Wilson, mixes up human demands and needs with resource availability. So basically you do a calculation on supply from the planet and demand from humanity. And you make assumptions on technology, on needs, and on pathways. The planetary boundary framework is the first framework that actually decouples that and says, we have now so much overwhelming evidence from all the Anthropocene research, from the tipping point risks, and from the fact that the Holocene is the only equilibrium state we know that can support civilizations as we know it, and that we cannot exclude irreversible changes, that set out the first time ever of quantifying safe boundaries beyond which we have a high likelihood of triggering irreversible changes that can undermine life support and ultimately the stability of the planet, but within which we have a safe operating space and a high likelihood of keeping the planet as close as possible to an interglacial, stable, Holocene-like state. That was the first time that was done. It's even been criticized for being, let's say, too natural scientific, but I think we've really turned a corner, and I would like to emphasize that I would argue is very much thanks to the collaboration that you and I have, Ottmar, of of truly integrating economics, the global commons, with the planetary boundaries and the Earth system science to say that we need a stable planet for equity, for justice, for development, for economic growth, even if you would wish to focus in that way. So in that sense, it's new. But why is it not new? Well, I also want to really emphasize in this unique opportunity I have here that, you know, we sat in 2008 with the first tipping point science paper by John Schellenhuber and Tim Lenton. The Potsdam Institute led this. We had all the Anthropocene evidence from Professor Will Steffen and the International Geosphere Biosphere Program published in 2006. We had all the Resilience Alliance research of regime shifts and interconnected, self-regulating, complex system dynamics, that the Earth system is a self-regulating system across all the spheres. We had all that evidence right in front of us. So if it hadn't been us and the planetary boundary science community taking that next little logical step, someone else would have done it. Not as good as us, of course, but I think you know, this is it Isaac Newton who said, you know, I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, and I think that really applies in this case. We were so close to that next step in the scientific endeavor. So in that sense, it's not new. It's building on 30, 40 years of remarkable advancements in the Earth system analysis.
But do you actually remember a moment when this almost symbolic graphics came to your mind, the moment when you really understood talking about it, the way you talk about it is essential and is basically the foundation of a whole science that yet has to be developed?
Yeah, so that's one of the secrets in the planetary boundary science, which of course I can share in this closed room because you won't tell anyone else outside of this room, of course, that, you know, the planetary boundary science is more than a concept. It's a framework, it's a theory. It really tries to, you know, very objectively answer two questions. What are the Earth system processes and systems that regulates the state and functioning of the Earth system? And for each one of those, can we identify a control variable that we can quantify, beyond which we risk irreversible changes, but within which we're likely to keep the planet with the Holocene as a reference point. That's the theory. But, you know, in 2007, I got a question from an elderly leader in Sweden called Boetius, who was running at the time something called the Telberg Forum. And this was a competitor, I think, Jill, to the World Economic Forum, actually. It was an effort of having a focus on, the theme was, how on earth can we live together in this beautiful little village in northern parts of Sweden, and actually gathered, you know, Kofi Annan and really high-level people, and they wanted to set up a round table with a map of the whole planet, and put decision makers around it, and ask the question, how do we govern the planet? How on earth can we live together? And I got the question, could you please prepare a report for this? Could you please give us the numbers? What does the edge of the table say? What is the edge of the table? Beyond which point don't you want to, when do you fall over? And that did inspire us, actually. So it was a pure science endeavor, but there was already from the beginning a bit of an ask out there.
Yeah, but now this is left to all of us other scientists to communicate with people why it is not like the Viking myth of getting your ship close to the edge of the world, falling off the cliff. And so please let us know what is positive about this boundary idea. It's not enough to just say there's the limit, there's the cliff, but what is positive and activating?
Yeah, you know, and I see some of the CLUE students in the room here. They know that I always start with this slide in all lectures. They might feel that it's almost boring by now. This is the Earthrise, Apollo 8, 1968, phenomenal photo that every astronaut that has seen this in the real life come down on planet Earth and say, it completely rebooted my mind. It was a complete paradigm shift. I've reconnected to planet Earth thanks to this experience. The problem is we cannot all become astronauts. I mean, that would have solved it. But science, the planetary boundary science, tries to be a substitute, a really cheap green substitute to flying into space. And that is what the planetary boundary science gives us, the quantitative safe space for us to become stewards of the entire planet. And that often comes across as being a very negative message because we're in the red on 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, as you know. But I see it as one of the most important positive contributions for us to be able to navigate our future in the Anthropocene. You know, isn't it fantastic that now that we're risking the stability of the entire planet, that science can now provide, after 15 years of science, and by the way, it's not only the planetary boundary science, it's informed from the IPCC, the IPBS, all the fantastic work from so many communities. I mean, we're synthesizing the research in the planet boundary research to give us the roadmap. And in my view, that's a positive.
Okay. Yeah, for me, mostly it rings a bell, the positive side when you talk safe operating space or use words such as Earth resilience. And maybe we spend a moment connecting those ideas to the planetary boundaries to really get into this achievement mode.
Yeah, no, I was one of the founding directors together with my dear friend and colleague, Professor Carl Folke of the Stockholm Resilience Center. We were inspired by the science of the Resilience Alliance. As you know, resilience theory defines resilience today as persistency, keeping a system, an ecosystem, or the planet in a stable cup, a stable state. It's also adaptive capacity, and it's the ability to transform. The planetary boundary science takes one part of that resilience theory, persistency. That planetary boundaries is about Earth resilience, the capacity, the biogeochemical capacity of the Earth system to remain as close as possible to the interglacial state that had allowed us to develop civilizations over the past 12,000 years. That is how we define Earth resilience. So the 9 planetary boundaries are identified based on their interactions and capacities to basically, to put it simple, to keep buffering capacity at a healthy level, dominated, as you do the science here, by negative feedbacks, so dampening feedbacks. So to put it simple, the ability of the Earth system to cool down the climate forcing caused by transgressing the climate boundary, for example. And that is all about biosphere integrity. It's about fresh water. It's about soils. It's about the nitrogen phosphorus cycles. It's about aerosols. So we can today conclude scientifically that even for climate, even if you care only about climate, you'll fail on the Paris Agreement unless you come back into the safe operating space of the biosphere boundaries, because they give us Earth resilience. And that is kind of how the planetary boundaries tie together with the resilience concept. And we have the evidence there, and you've probably seen these slides, and this is one of the inputs to our biosphere boundary assessments. And to the left, you have the Global Carbon Project. This fantastic work of every year updating the global carbon cycle. And I find this to be one of the most remarkable pieces of evidence of Earth resilience that we have. Because on the x-axis, you have from 1850 until today, so the whole journey of fossil fuel industrial development on Earth. On the y-axis, you have billion tons or gigatons of carbon. You see the hockey stick of burning fossil fuels in gray and land degradation, deforestation in orange. The question is it all of that area under the curve that has caused the 1.2, 1.3 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise so far? The answer is no, because the oceans have absorbed the dark green part, and intact nature on land, intact nature, not agriculture, intact nature on land, have absorbed the light green part. So it's only the blue residual that has caused the climate crisis we're sitting in today. And the interesting thing is that for the past 150 years, that number every year has been roughly, quite exactly, 50%. 25% carbon dioxide uptake from intact nature on land, 25% in the ocean. And even a kid looking at this graph will tell you, isn't that interesting? The more we punch the planet, the more she's helping us. And that is one of these remarkable resilience proof points that the planet is stressed under our anthropogenic pressure, but the planet under a healthy state is able to buffer. The biggest buffer point, the one that you're such an expert on, Antje, is on the right here, which is the ocean heat uptake. 90%, as you know, 90% of the heat caused by our fossil fuel burning is in the ocean. So of course we need a planetary boundary approach to keep the resilience of the planet intact. Because unfortunately, and I won't even go through some of that evidence, you know it, we have so many published papers now, unfortunately, showing that biome after biome after biome on land is tipping over from net sink to net source. The Brazilian part of the Amazon is no longer carbon sink. Planet Earth's richest ecosystem on land. We're nervous about the boreal forest in the Scandinavia, really nervous about permafrost in Russia, really nervous about the temperate forest in Canada because of fire, bark beetle outbreak, disease patterns. This is potentially losing resilience. And the off the charts, I mean, you know this on the ocean. My God, what we're seeing in 2023 of the off the charts surface temperatures in the ocean is really scary. So that is all about Earth resilience.
Yeah, but you forgot to point out the x-axis here, the timeline. And I love this graphics too, but when you look closely, you see how time flies. And I will not forget the moment when we sat together at the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh and were interviewed together. And today, time has moved on, and technically, as we may point out, we have reached 1.5. Not the long-term 1.5, but we're there. So basically this fight for saying, on the one hand, for measuring everything, observing it and seeing how during our lifetime things have changed. When we were a kid, the ocean took up more CO2. It's actually weakening in CO2 uptake, and noticing how time runs away. So what do you say, as the journalists asked us, when you want to keep up hope? And the majority and many scientists say too late, give up 1.5 target.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. And I say a few things. I mean, first of all, I do actually start by acknowledging that we do have to be very nervous, that 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is, as you know, written into the legally binding Paris Agreement as a target, spoken about as a goal, is neither goal or target. It's a limit. It's a boundary. It is scientifically well shown that this is not only a limit, we'll come to that, but it's a big number. And I find today that one of the most important sequences is actually to connect the current assessment of risk with paleoclimatic research. And we have great researchers at PIC doing this work. And here's one of the slides that I find very telling, which is over the past 400,000 years. And what you see here is the journey of planet Earth, first in the latter part of the Pleistocene. So here we're talking about basically the more recent part of the 3 million year Quaternary. And then we leave the last ice age some 18,000 years ago, and we enter this extraordinarily stable Holocene state, the 12,000 years you see here. And then you see the lines, which is the science graph showing the journey we're on. So now we can conclude one very important insight, that humans have been around on planet Earth for, as far as we know, roughly 250,000 years. So we have actually experienced two of these, you see that circle, but two of these ice ages and two interglacials. That's us as modern humans on planet Earth. And when you look at the data, you see that there's a corridor of life here. The corridor of life is very narrow, this big cylinder you see here. We've never been beyond, as far as we know, 2 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise. And deep ice age is in the order of -5, -6 degrees Celsius. So that is the widest range that we've been able to exist as humans on planet Earth. But then we come out of the last ice age as a few million hunters and gatherers on planet Earth. We're living in caves, and we come into this extraordinarily stable part where the life corridor shrinks even more, and it narrows in to this extraordinarily stable 14 degrees Celsius planet, plus minus 0.5. 0.5. So the warmest point, as far as we know, is a 14.5 degrees Celsius planet, and now we are beyond 15. We are actually close to 15.5, as Antje points out. And we barely leave the ice age, and we enter this Holocene, just 2,000 years into it, and we go through the Neolithic Revolution, we domesticate animals and plants, and off we go in this extraordinary journey that takes us to finally sitting at the University of Potsdam, celebrating the Tyler Prize in 2024. That's basically the story. And we know the evidence here because the domestication of animals and plants basically occurred simultaneously across all continents. And last time I checked, we didn't sit with mobile phones. We could call each other and say, was it a great idea to plant a seed? Oh no, rice, teff, wheat, corn was more or less domesticated in the same time, which lends itself to a very dramatic piece of conclusion, that the Holocene is the only state of the planet we know for certain can support our world as we know it. We've lived in that wider life corridor, but never outside of it. But if we really want to, cherish our world, that is the corridor where we have lived in, because that's where nature settles in. That's where the hydrological cycle becomes stable. Spring, summer, autumn, winter comes predictably every year. You go down to the tropics in the savannah, you'll have roughly 25 rainfall events. Starts in May, ends in the end of September. You get your 90 to 120 days of cultivation season every year. It became worth to invest. And that is probably the takeoff point for us becoming farmers, settling down and developing into this innovation-driven, technologically driven global industrial economy as we know it today. That's the drama. Because today we're heading towards 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. And if you think of that number, 2.7, at a blink of time, and you draw that clock back in time, you end up 4 or 5 million years ago. It's actually even outside of the Quaternary. So, we've only been here for 250,000 years, but if you push that corridor even further back in time. Actually, the Potsdam Institute is the first institute in the world, thanks to Andrzej Ganopolski and the work with the Climate X model, Climate 2 model, like in this case, to have been able to reproduce the journey of planet Earth over the entire quaternary. And as far as we know, we haven't ever exceeded 2 degrees. So this is one of the biggest frustrations I see, that why don't we understand this? That 1 degree is a big number. 1.5 is a huge number. 2 is a number we do not want to come close. 2.7 is nothing but disaster. Nothing but disaster. So of course, that's the negative side of that question. The good side is, again, you know, when we have all that evidence, of course, that lends itself to push towards holding 1.5. And I'm at least among those scientists that feel that we'll come to that. Overshoot is inevitable, yes, but that we can still hold 1.5 on the longer term if we come back into the biosphere boundaries, if we keep the resilience of the system intact.
But the way you speak about it, temperature, actually we should go to the other proxy, and that is really carbon. So carbon is in the middle of all of this. Carbon is the element of life. And do you think that there is a solution about carbon, about life, to all of this, to our trajectory?
Well, definitely there is a solution. And this is one of the exciting areas where we're doing a lot of research together with partners across the world, not only on the energy transition, but also on securing carbon sinks in nature, working on carbon dioxide removal technologies with the Mercator Center, which will soon be integrating with the Potsdam Institute. I'd just like to share with you, again, just for your eyes only, because this is ongoing work, it's unpublished, what we call the carbon bucket assessment on what are the carbon budgets we need to hold to be able to have a safe landing, to give us a chance of holding 1.5. And the data looks like this. So it's a bit messy because it's ongoing work. But to the left, you just have the IPCC C2 scenario that can hold 1.5. And just look at that green line that we have to, for land, reach net zero by 2030, and for the energy transition, basically by 2040, 2050. So that we know, that is what translates to the carbon law of reducing emissions by half every decade. But that is, and that's the table to the right here, that's only one carbon budget. That's bucket number 1. And we quantify this, and we know that today we have roughly 275 billion tons of carbon dioxide remaining in that fossil fuel transition bucket. Now that gives us, as you know, some 6 years left under current level of emissions, because we're burning some 40 billion tons per year. So 275 divided by 40. But there's a but here, which I think is both challenging, but also really informative and helpful. Why do the IPCC GCM models give us a budget? How can it be that we have an orderly phase-out opportunity? Why do we have 275 billion tons of carbon dioxide remaining? Well, unfortunately, or in a way, realistically, the reason is that the models have already factored in additional budgets related particularly to the biosphere planetary boundaries. So bucket 2 is AFOLU, the whole agricultural sector, managed forest and managed land, that quite magically in the models on average is assumed to go from a net source of 3-4 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year to a net sink of -5. Nothing less than a green revolution, an agriculture revolution, agriculture going from the single largest source to becoming part of the solution. We have technologies to do this. Theodor Friedrich is here, who leads the conservation agricultural work, for example. I mean, there's so many innovations there that can be scaled, and we have so much work going on there. But that has to be understood. There's this carbon budget, and look what it adds up to. Something like, the cumulative numbers out there, but it's more like 200 billion tons of carbon dioxide that has to be secured through managed land. Bucket 3 is intact nature, which has to continue to absorb 25%. So it's 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year, and we cannot lose nature. We cannot allow the European Union to translate forest policy to allow for destroying the remaining natural forest in Scandinavia. It just cannot happen, because that has to be, it's a huge budget. It's in the order of 300 billion tons of carbon dioxide, bigger than the fossil fuel budget. The fourth bucket is in the ocean. Same thing there. The health in the ocean is fundamental. And the final one is, of course, the one we talk more and more about, the carbon dioxide removal budget, which is also huge. The model's already built in assumptions on scaling everything from carbon capture and storage, BECCS, direct air capture, in the order of 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. So, dear friends, buckle up. This is a journey of a sustainable and a sustainability transition. It's not about only the energy phase out. It's all these carbon buckets that need to deliver. So again, Antje, this is often seen as like, oh my God. I want to turn that around to say, isn't this amazing? This gives investors, Keith Tuffley is here in the room as well, great friend, Martin Stutchley and others. Trying to translate this science into investable capital opportunities. The Land Bank initiative is amazing. Guido Traub-Smith with the work on doing the first, carbon investment curves for all the planetary boundaries. These are things that can help us, should not put a brake on initiatives. And I think we need help in how to communicate that.
This story of buckets and what you're saying, that reminds me of basically this big other trajectory that is so old, that is having some kind of a balance with nature, having some kind of a neutral behavior as humans, if not being the ones that are fertilizing nature. So in many human cultures, this concept of striking a balance is deeply rooted. I think of discussions with Polynesians or Inuit cultures, or a lot the people that take care of oases. They all think about how can we as humans grow, have a good life, but still strike a balance with nature. So in this matter, when you ask those people, it's always about rules. It's about laws. And I heard, or I know, that you are working on a carbon law. So what is that? And is that rooted in this idea of a balance?
No, it is. And it's. I'm glad you raised this, Antje, because we have so much to learn from indigenous knowledge. And we know that 80% of the remaining biodiversity on Earth is under the custodianship of indigenous communities when it comes to land-based biodiversity. We also know that the rules of how you relate and manage local natural capital is something that has been understood for millennia in traditional communities, but we have allowed ourselves in the modern industrialized era to decouple, and now we have to recouple. And I think the way to recouple is actually to put regulatory means in place. I'm quite nervous about all these voluntary carbon efforts, which I think are really encouraging because it shows that business leaders in the world really want to be part of the solution. But we need policymakers to step up the game and basically work with science-based policymaking, which I think should be guided by quantitative assessments, both on boundaries, but also on budgets and trajectories. And I think what the European Union is now doing with the advisory board on climate change that you're leading, Ottmar, for example, is a phenomenal way of linking that science into policymaking, which enabled Johan Rockström as the European Commissioner for Climate to dare set a 90% emission reduction target by 2040. So the carbon law is inspired by the Moore's law, which became a self-fulfilling prophecia, as you know, for the computer industry, of doubling the speed of resistors to transistors by 12 to 24 months. And the extraordinary thing with the Moore's law is that it became a self-fulfilling prophecia. The dream outcome is, of course, that the carbon law of cutting emissions by half every decade also becomes a science-based innovation driver. And the beauty with the carbon law, that few people think about, it's scalable. If you talk about cutting emissions by half every decade, you could do it as an individual, you could do it as a household, you could do it as a country, you could do it as a university, or you could do it as a world. That is possible to do at any scale. And we're now working on the carbon law for nature. This is being done between us at PIC and Conservation International to create the same innovation, guided by science, the same innovation pathway to show how do we go from the net 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide now emitted from unsustainable destruction of intact nature and conventional agriculture to come to net zero by 2030 and -5 by 2040 and even higher up to -10 by 2040. So carbon law for nature. Put this all together, it would give us an integrated set of tools that can enable us to come back in within the safe operating space. I hope you see that there's a connectivity here. You have the planetary boundaries where it all starts. It translates to budgets. Budgets translate to trajectories. Trajectories become laws, and laws have to be connected to the policy research and get to work on how to speed up the transition.
So because we're running out of time, we have to go immediately, or we have to stay in that solution space. It was planned that we take some time to also throw you back into the apocalypse of the tipping points, but you have to click on because we don't have time for that.
Okay. You may have seen this. If you want more information on the great work by David McKay et al. On the 16 tipping elements, the 5 you see here with the stars are those that are likely to be crossed at 1.5. Greenland ice sheet, West Antarctic ice sheet, all the coral reef system in tropical regions, barren sea ice, and abrupt thawing of permafrost. So that is a very strong scientific guide. Let's not give up on 1.5. Anyway.
And unfortunately, the corals seem to be at this moment the weakest of them all. It's quite scary, but yeah, of course, this debate we also have often. Humans need a bit of apocalypse to think about paradise. They just belong together. And now we go to the solution space in our trajectory towards the paradise. So this idea of us as Homo sapiens is always connected to our ability to be cooperative, to be social, to develop and invent technologies at all times. And you are focusing on a technology, one of the oldest technology of humans as far as we understand, and that is working together to develop an idea of commons. That's very old, much older than most people think. The little island where my family comes from, Föhr, has a explicit and intrinsic concept of the Allmende. So that's a lot of your new work, to touch this idea of scaling commons. And can you dive right into that and tell us why this is the solution space?
No, I think this is taking all the planetary boundary science, the tipping point research, the Anthropocene evidence to a step of how do we actually become stewards of the planet. And this is, by the way, also part of the core scientific vision of the Potsdam Institute, where Ottmar and I, when we stepped up as director of the Institute over 5 years back now, set that the vision is science on how to govern the global commons within planetary boundaries. That's kind of what we want to guide our science across all our work. And we've just published a very exciting paper, which is in the Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences in the US on launching the concept of planetary commons. So how did we come to this? Well, to begin with, it's a collective work between earth scientists, tipping point researchers, but also lawyers, social scientists, political scientists. So it's a really collective, multidisciplinary work together. You know that we have, as you point out, Antje, a long tradition on commons, Nobel Prize laureate Johan Rockström, but also on the global commons, with 4 recognized global commons: Antarctica, the high seas and the deep seabed, outer space, and you could call the atmosphere also as a recognized global commons. These are all systems that have been defined as global commons because they are outside of national jurisdictions, therefore owned by nobody, and therefore owned by all of us. And they therefore need regulatory means for ruling their exploitation or non-exploitation in the case of Antarctica, to protect them. Now, and they all have treaties, legal treaties. Now, what we have recognized in the planetary boundary science is that that's not enough. That we've come to a point, which is actually very dramatic, that for the livelihood of anyone who lives in Potsdam, or if you live in New York, or if you're in the indigenous community in New Zealand, we all collectively depend on a number of biophysical systems well beyond the global commons, that they remain stable. Because if they're not stable, if they tip over and go from dampening change to reinforcing change, it will send invoices that will hit anyone on planet Earth, irrespective of where you live. So suddenly we realize that we need to introduce a complementary concept, and that is the planetary commons. And here you have a few of them. And just to show you the messy table in this paper, just to show that there are many of them, and the most important family are the tipping elements in the higher part, and they're separated in the spheres: the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the biosphere, the lithosphere, and the cryosphere. And to put it, just to give you one example, this science shows clearly that the Amazon rainforest is a planetary commons, even if it's inside national jurisdictions. It is a collective good for all of humanity, because if we allow the Amazon to cross a tipping point, and by the way, the latest Brazilian science shows we're very close to a tipping point in the Amazon, because the combined pressure of transgressing the land boundary, the biodiversity boundary, the freshwater boundary, and the climate boundary, and all of this together makes the system more weak. Now,
if that is a planetary commons that we all have equal interest in keeping healthy as the indigenous communities in Manaus or the consumers in Sao Paulo, what does this mean for President Lula da Silva? Well, in my view, it means that he should be able to stand up in the UN General Assembly and say, I will be stewards of this planetary commons. I will actually serve humanity to keep this planetary common intact, but it's a service to humanity. And therefore, you have to compensate me for delivering that service. Thank you. And that is what we're trying to achieve with the planetary commons framework. A teeny-weeny step in governance in the world, but I think quite exciting. And believe it or not, I actually had a chance to talk to Marina Silva and President Lula da Silva at the COP28 in Dubai, and they loved the idea. I mean, not so surprising. Marina Silva is a fantastic Minister for the Environment. You know, she has almost by herself reduced deforestation of the Amazon over the last 2 years by 50%. I mean, she deserves a Tyler Prize. I mean, it's just to see that. But it's quite interesting. And this is just the first step we're taking in that research.
I know. I mean, it's already fully paradise mode, as you all can see, because to think of such a global governance, we have to think of good leaders, fantastic planetary stewards, governments that we trust to hand them over money for nature. So in that paradise space, you have established an Earth Commission. And we would like to know how you think you connect the stewardship problem. I mean, this is a governance that would have to be built from scratch because we have no such thing as a governance of the global rainforest that in theory only belongs to all of us. What is the Earth Commission and how could it deal with this fundamental problem of deep environmental justice?
Yeah, so and it kind of as a closing graph to guide that solution part. I mean, we are at this juncture where planetary health is continuing to slide downwards, and we need this, either we continue sliding in the wrong direction, a dead end basically, or we transition in a new direction. And myself, together with a whole group, Noko Ishii, are you still here, Noko? Wonderful. At the time, head of the Global Environment Facility, former Deputy Finance Minister in Japan, the one who actually commissioned the first Global Commons in the Anthropocene report that inspired the Planetary Commons. We established the Global Commons Alliance some 5-6 years ago and came up immediately with the idea that we should establish an Earth Commission as the foundational scientific support for developing science-based target for cities, for businesses, for system change, accelerating system change, to communicate science much more effectively. What is the Earth Commission? Well, it's, again, staying within this room. It is inspired by the IPCC, and it's basically concluding that, you know, we've come to a point when we need nothing less than IPCC for the planet. And the planetary boundary science is great, but it is de facto one group of scientists. And if you think of the IPCC, you have multiple groups of scientists. You know, as Oliver Günther pointed out in the beginning, you know, science is really about the debates. It's about controversy. It's about collision of facts, evidence, ideas. And the Earth Commission is the first attempt of creating, you know, an interdisciplinary, transparent, under the future Earth. So it's open nominations, social scientists, natural scientists working together as a global science mechanism for defining safe and just Earth system boundaries. We even chose to not use the term planetary boundary to say this is again another global common public good for humanity. The first reports of the Earth Commission has been published in Nature, and we have now started the second phase, so inspired by the IPCC to have that scientific update. And the unique breakthrough is that the Earth Commission has not only synthesized safe, which is the planetary boundaries, but also just. And the justice part, as you can imagine, is even more challenging to quantify for the same control variables as the safe, which is a unique breakthrough. So what we did in the Earth Commission, and I say we, it was really led by my co-chair, Professor Joyita Gupta at Amsterdam University, defined, the social sciences defined justice in terms of what's the maximum allowed significant harm beyond which we reach unacceptable levels of impacts on peoples. We're talking about millions of people, sectors, countries, tipping over into unacceptable social impacts from transgressing boundaries. And what this results in will come as no surprise to you, is that the safe space shrinks even further. But interestingly, not for all the boundaries. For biodiversity, for example, there's no science to show that safety is not equal to justice. That's quite interesting. Justice comes equally from ecosystem services and functions on biodiversity. But for climate, even if the safe boundary is at 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which that point you will likely trigger tipping points and push the planet in the wrong direction. But for justice, the social sciences assesses that the just level is already at 1 degree Celsius because of heat impacts, extreme events, undermining livelihoods, all the coral reef systems, livelihoods for over 300 million people across the world. So that is a reminder that this is really about safety and justice. And that is a debate we have in the Earth Commission. I consider that the highest level definition of justice today is every human being's right to be born on a livable planet. And another way of defining that is the following, that what right do we have who are now living on planet Earth to hand over a planet which is less livable than the planet where we were born? And that is, of course, a same definition as the Brundtland definition of sustainable development, but it takes it to the planetary scale. And I think that is what the Earth Commission is trying to advance.
Okay, I think so far the candidate did well, but this was the friendly conversation. Now come 3 people, young, brilliant minds, that will ask questions to you, Johan. And then, of course, you are all invited. The audience will have still more time to ask questions and get answers. And you think of what you always wanted to ask and you never dared to ask, so that we all can have fun. So of the 3 brilliant young minds, 2 of them are real students with Johan and 1 is a member of the Tyler Prize Committee. And let's see if you can find out who is who. I will first ask Luana Schwartz to speak out and ask Johan a question.
Is it on? Oh yeah, perfect. Great, thank you so much. So science has come so far, looking at the quantification of all 9 planetary boundaries alone. Meanwhile, this is a major milestone of the natural sciences. The transgression of 6 boundaries is alarming. So I wonder about the major transformations that society has to bring about in order for us to return to the safe operating space of humanity. And I actually have 2 questions about this. So the first one is about our role. What, in your point of view, is our role as scientists within these transformative processes? And what are solutions, technological, institutional, or other, that have already been implemented and led to real change? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Luana. Yeah, it's a really important question. And there are many entry points to that question, but we've transgressed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. It's climate, but also all the biosphere boundaries, together with novel entities. And what we find in the evidence that there are 2 transformations that can quite rapidly bring us close to within the safe operating space on all these 6. And then one is, of course, the energy transition, so to decarbonize, phase out fossil fuels and all industrial greenhouse gases. But the other one is the food system transition. And that is quite remarkable when you look at the data, that the food system is the single largest reason why we're transgressing the freshwater boundary. Nitrogen, phosphorus is all about the Haber-Bosch process and fertilizers. Land system change is all about agricultural expansion. We know that freshwater consumption is by far driven by unsustainable agriculture. So there is a phenomenal solution pathway here if we can invest in transitions in these 2 areas. And what role for science then, Luana? Well, I think there are 2 things that I'd like to emphasize here. One is, again, just emphasizing Oliver Günther's point here, that academia is about debate, and there will always be scientific uncertainties. You can't imagine how much work still remains for the planetary boundary science. I mean, we're fighting over the control variables. How do we do with the ocean? How can we improve the narrowing in on the uncertainty ranges? There's a whole community. There's over 2,000 papers that have been peer-reviewed on planetary boundaries since it started 15 years ago. And many of those, I can tell you, are quite critical. That's beautiful. But I think we as scientists need to also be better at having our debates in closed doors, coming to consensus, and not confusing society.
we are confusing society on 1.5. We are confusing society on tipping points, very much on tipping points. Just look at the AMOC discussions. Stefan Ramsdorff is here. I mean, in my view...
It's always all of his fault, right?
It's always his fault. Read his paper in Oceanography. I mean, it's just the most beautiful summary of AMOC science in the world. I mean, that's the truth. No, but I mean, I think we need to be more clever in how we engage with the communication. Not to impose results. No, but say, here's the mountain, here's the normal distribution of where we are, but just agree on this is something where we all agree upon. And we know that even if you would become more conservative in our assessments, it's a very scary piece of information already if you just talk about what all of us agree upon. But the second part, which is why this session is so inspiring to me, is I think we in science need to even better engage with business, with cities, with industry leaders. I see that Helmut Holzkabel is here with whom I've been privileged to sit on the advisory board of Mercedes-Benz. We talked about Jill and World Economic Forum. We have the World Business Council Sustainable Development. All of these are really, I think we have a responsibility as scientists to be much more on our toes and engage with agents of change in society. I led just 2 days back the Sustainable Transport Forum in Sweden, hosted by Scania, owned by German Traton, one of the big 5 truck manufacturers in the world. I can tell you, 6 hours with the truck industry, with the CEO Peter Carlson of Northvolt, the world's largest battery factory, with SSAB, the first company in the world, state-owned Swedish company, doing hydrogen-based steel production at scale. You exit that room as a scientist saying, we've really turned a corner. We're not piloting anymore. This is getting real. What business is really expecting is to get scientific boundaries, pathways to help them get more investment, go even faster. And I'm coming back again to, so many of you, both Keith and Guido and Mark, we need that engagement even stronger. And I know it's quite uncomfortable for many academics. The Planetary Boundary Science has had a privilege to kind of step out of that comfort zone, but I think we need more of that. And actually, by the way, I should do a little marketing piece. We've launched the Planet Guardians, which is an effort of having the elders for the planet, by the way. So that's quite an exciting way of bridging science to change.
We have more student questions, Johan, and we have Jonathan Patz now, who has a question for you.
Yes, first, thank you for your amazing science and communication of your science. And I want to thank the Tyler Prize for letting me sit in between 2 young, brilliant people. In the past decade, the lens or framework of planetary health has grown rapidly across schools of health sciences. Of course, the 9 planetary boundaries are within the core curriculum, and each boundary has its own human health implications. Now, with 6 of 9 planetary boundaries breached, and the urgency growing for bold action, my question to you, Johan, is how much might the health narrative heighten motivation for decision makers to act more quickly and non-incrementally?
No, thanks. I think human health is probably one of the strongest and also most underutilized levers of positive change to move back within a safe operating space, because we know that the aerosol boundary, the climate boundary, actually all the boundaries have such strong connections with health. As you know, we have led, together with Professor Walt Willits, Professor of Public Health at Harvard, the Eat Lancet Commission work, which, by the way, among the 10 most cited scientific papers in the world in policy documents, 2 are planetary boundaries, and the 3rd one is on the Eat Lancet Commission work. So this resonates, and we would like to connect more with the planetary boundary science with the Planetary Health Alliance work. So another fantastic Tyler Prize laureate, Andy Haynes, who serves on our science advisory board, chaired by Antje, is a fantastic bridge there. And you may not know that PIC is the first institute in Germany with a professor on climate health, Professor Sabine Gabrich. So we have a climate health team, and both Otmar and I and Bettina see that as a really priority science area for the Institute. So I think I'd love to follow up on this.
And now we have Magalizo Nialzulu to ask the third question, and then, of course, we open it to you, the audience.
Yeah, thanks for giving this opportunity, and congrats to you, Johan, as well as you've put it, that it's a collective action. So to the whole group behind all the research, both in planetary boundaries, earth system sciences, regime shifts, and even tipping points. So just building on these developments that have been made so far in these planetary boundaries, earth system science, and even like the planetary health, planetary commons, what would be some of the applied opportunities to effectively balance the synergies and trade-offs between meeting the socioeconomic goals, especially those specified in Sustainable Development Goals and even beyond SDGs? And what would be the balance to look at it without transgressing either or compromising the critical functioning of the biosphere where we are achieving these human goals? And the second one is sort of looking at the actors who can be the priority actors that it can take on this action.
Yeah, thanks, Manganizo. By the way, it's Dr. Krüger. He just defended his PhD with excellent results. So I'm very proud. That's really good. And I sometimes get this question: how can you keep your smile on your face when doing so much negative research? And I say it's thanks to the students, thanks to colleagues, thanks to this nerdy privilege of celebrating publishing a paper. It's just so fun, and it's something it's our currency at the Institute, and so I think one should recognize that, actually. So to your question, I think we are actually among the first at the Potsdam Institute, but together with the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, where, by the way, John Schellenhuber is now taking over as a lead, but with a few additional groups like Detlef van Vuren at PBL in the Netherlands, where we're doing the first integrated assessment modeling efforts of exploring sustainable development goals within planetary boundaries. There's one paper published on this, only one, and I think that is something that will need to be even more in focus. And we've actually sent a letter to Antonio Guterres, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, to say, fantastic that you're holding your Summit of the Future as the first day of the New York Climate Week, but you cannot have a discussion on the future without starting with the planet. And you have to put the Sustainable Development Goals inside the planet to be able to have a serious discussion on an equitable future for humanity. And so let's hope that occurs. On solutions, I think you put your finger as well, by the way, because your thesis was so focused on that. We know, is Catherine still here with us? I think
yes.
Wonderful. we Catherine Richardson, by the way, who is with whom there would not be any planetary boundary science. It's Catherine Richardson, Will Steffen, the late Will Steffen, who is no longer with us, from Australia National University. The three of us have been kind of the core facilitators and leads on the planetary boundary science. And what we concluded last night is actually part of your thesis, Manganizo, that we need to understand interactions. We need to understand how planetary boundaries interact and how that changes the safe operating space. And at the Potsdam Institute, we're actually developing a Potsdam Earth System model, which will be, we hope, a planetary boundary simulator to be able to do that kind of research.
Thank you. And I think now it's time for the audience to ask questions. Again, all questions are welcome. There is a walking microphone in the back. We'll have a question over there.
Johan, congratulations. The World Economic Forum is very supportive of your work and very grateful to see your recognition through the Tyler Award today. We know that business holds many of the levers to the changes that you're talking about in terms of the transformation. And luckily, business leaders are thinking long-term because they're thinking about profitability and relevance in the long term. What advice would you have to CEOs today in light of the state of the science?
You mean advice for business in particular? Yeah, no, to begin with, I think you're putting your finger on something that is often misunderstood. It's often wrongly thought that businesses think in short term, as if policy would thinking more long term. And I agree with you. It's generally the reverse. Businesses think in long term. They want to have a thriving business over decades, and therefore I get quite disappointed with business leaders who are still, when it comes to environment and climate, they're simply just sinking under the requirement of reporting under ESG measures and seeing it as a compliance. Well, when you rarely, if ever, see businesses stepping up and doing profit and loss statements that really show that they're earning more, they're being more successful by aligning with the scientific base targets or boundaries, and that is one of those issues that I think we also need to come back to, because the Science-Based Target Initiative, for example, and the whole climate agenda on mapping Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions is of course necessary, but it is so far dominated as a compliance, very expensive for many companies and difficult to be able to quantify. That's why they go out on the voluntary carbon markets, by the way. But to change that around, and that I think would be one of the exciting points. But also, I mean, I'm really encouraged to see that more and more business leaders understand we have to go beyond carbon. So that's also something that would be great to have more support for that. And one doesn't have to go to all the 9 boundaries, by the way. I mean, just starting with biodiversity and freshwater is an enormous step. Land is just a, land biodiversity, climate, you're already on a pathway towards a more planetary-based business model.
Then we have a question over there.
Yeah, maybe I should stand up, right? And anyone asking a question after me should stand up. It's good to people to see you, I think. Yeah. I'm Rashid Smaila. I'm a professor from the University of British Columbia. Johan, congratulations. Welcome to the club. It's a beautiful place to be. It's wonderful. So your point about we have no right to pass a planet which is in a worse state than we got to future generations. I love that. I agree with you. Now, the other thing is intra-generational equity. Within the current generation, there's a big disparity, and you talk about it. And I know your work. I know you spend time in Africa, Zimbabwe, all over. So there's something dear to your heart. I think the key thing is the current generation really has to think through this and find a way, because essentially we just have to change our lifestyles in order to remain within these boundaries, especially those of us lucky to be in the rich parts of the world. We have to give up something and allow those who are really struggling to come up. And this is not an easy challenge. So what are your views? How do we get this world to do what we need to do? One of them.
No, thanks, Rashid. So one of the fantastic Tyler Prize awardees, I think one of the let's say most straightforward implications of a planetary boundary analysis in terms of justice is that every boundary translates to a budget, and that budget is finite, and that finite budget has to be distributed in a fair way among all economies or societies or citizens in the world. We debate that on carbon. Sure, we have all these contraction and convergence efforts. We're not very good at it, but it's the only place where we're discussing it. But how do we do with nitrogen? How do we do with phosphorus? Phosphorus is a finite resource with a planetary boundary budget to it. How do we secure that African small-scale farmers get a bump up of significant increase in access of reactive phosphate, while Europe and the US and parts of China and India needs to reduce? I think this has to be taken up almost like part of the planetary commons discussions of how do we have a fair redistribution of wealth and therefore natural capital. That is, by the way, something that the Earth Commission did not focus on in its first round. It only focused it on significant harm levels. Now it will be trying to do work on as you know, he also serves on the Earth Commission in the second round, which is fantastic, where we want to have much more of a wealth redistribution assessment as well across the boundaries.
There's another question.
Thank you. Johan, you have very nicely described the complexity of the processes and the relations between the different processes. So that means to me, if we look for solutions, we should also think in complex systems to search for the solutions within these natural cycles. But humans seem to look at simple solutions, technical solutions. And if it comes, for example, to carbon emissions, one way would be reduce emissions, and the other way would be enhance the sinks, and hopefully the natural sinks. And limiting the emissions seems to be difficult because humans seem to be reluctant to do that. And the natural sink would be the oceans and the land with biomass, which is the preferable option. But also this is a very long shot. So the proposal now is, for example, the carbon capture and deposit the carbon dioxide deeply into the ground. Technically, I think it's feasible, it's doable. But what about the cycles? We would store away the carbon, which is probably okay, but we would also store away the oxygen. And this would be stored away for a very long time, while if we would capture the carbon with biological means, for example, with biomass, the oxygen in this process would be released back to the atmosphere. So if this carbon capture would be done in a great style, wouldn't that also offset natural cycles at some point in time and limit our oxygen resources in the atmosphere?
Yeah, well, to begin with, too, I mean, as I shared with this carbon bucket analysis, we have to do all of the above. There's no way of replacing, phasing out fossil fuels from scaling carbon dioxide removal technologies or investing in nature sinks. We need all of the above in parallel. We need to work on a sustainable agricultural transition. We need to keep nature intact. We need to ensure that ocean is stable, and how to do that is still a big question mark given what we're seeing in the ocean right now. But then on your point about are we at risk of scaling different forms of CDR to a point where we would destabilize oxygen fluxes, I would argue that that's very unlikely. We'd not see any such signs, but it's an important question for all geoengineering efforts. What are the unintended side effects? And this is something that we will be exploring more at PIC on solar radiation management, for example, which is one of these topics that come more and more to the forefront, given the fact that for every day that we don't make progress, you often see generally climate skeptics who have come to realize that they can no longer deny global warming caused by us humans. Then they jump onto the SRM bandwagon instead. And I think we need to do a lot of scientific assessments on what are the risks there.
We have a question in the back, in the front and to the left.
Yes, my name is Jens Rohrback. I'm from the Global Challenges Foundation. I'm here together with all of you to honor your research. But outside this room, I see a lot of backlash. And that's why my question is directed to some sort of advice from you two on a political tipping point that could be positive. I mean, we should be grateful to have your research on giving us what is at stake, but it's always easier to raise a question. And you know that in your own country now in the election, there is rather a compete on having the lowest price at the gas pump. And that is a wind that we can see blowing all over the world, although that we have this great research. And therefore my question to you, what is your best argument when you meet people that are skeptic? How can we make this room bigger? How can we go into elections where we also promise a living planet? Do you have any ideas to us as politicians to form that future?
Yeah,
we have 30 seconds.
And well, to start with, I mean, Antje and I decided not to enter that rabbit hole in a way that in truth, to be very honest with you, I think there's never been, as a scientist, I've never had reason to be so nervous as today when you look at all the data we have and how the world looks like geopolitically. I mean, we're in a very bad position, and we risk getting Trump back into office. We risk having a European election that doesn't strengthen or really confirm the Green Deal properly. We're seeing backtracking even in countries like Sweden. I mean, this is very negative, and the question is how to counteract that. And I find it actually surprisingly simple to do that. And I think this is an area where we're failing. So, of course, we need to put forward the analysis and the risks and the diagnostic. I mean, that's basically what we've been talking about. That's what I've been mostly engaged in. But the beauty today is that we know with overwhelming evidence that if we transition to a sustainable future, we get multiple benefits. And these multiple benefits are not only about health, it's also about security, it's also about stability in societies, it is about dignity, but it's also about jobs, economy, and competitiveness. So we know that, I mean, following that path, that Swedish populists who are trying now to reduce diesel prices are suggesting that we should simply continue sliding to this dead end. And I think we have not been very good at telling the story that, look here, the path to success, the winning journey, is the sustainable journey. Sustainability is not about environment. It's not about protecting things. Of course it is. I mean, we know it is. But fundamentally, it is about resilience, about stability, about competitiveness, about security, and about health. And I think this is something we have so far not really connected properly. And I find that very sad to see all the farmers on the streets of Berlin. I mean, it's such a political failure not to be able to have a policy measure to say, farmers, you're part of the solution. You're the most important guys we have. You provide us with food, but you're also part of the solution to go from source to sink. We need to have really strong policies to help you innovate, but we will also compensate you. We will secure that on net, your income levels will not be reduced. And you know, Jens, I mean, you've been a minister in the Swedish government. 1990, when Sweden introduced the highest price on carbon in the world, 100 euros per ton of carbon dioxide in 1990, it was done in a green tax reform that loaded massive cost on fossil fuel based. I mean, it was all the oil was heating houses in Sweden was thrown out. We went rapidly towards biomass-based energy systems. I mean, I can tell you a long story about this. Did we see any gilets jaunes in Sweden? No. Why? Because income tax levels were reduced, and it was a net zero impact. And I think is quite simple, actually. And I don't see that as being impossible to tell the positive stories, which are now robustly empirically anchored. I mean, the biggest risk that a country like Sweden has taken is to be bypassed by China on the green transition. And you'll simply become an economy that will slide towards becoming less and less competitive. Same with Germany. I mean, as we know, looking back to Helmut, I mean, what's happening in Germany, the car industry is in an existential innovation pathway. Either you survive and succeed, or you'll be gone. That's where we are today. It's the biggest transition since we embarked on the industrial economy 150, 200 years ago. So this is a very exciting part. It's a gauntlet. It's very messy. We know that in any system transition, things are messy before you're coming out on the other end. So that's where we are. But I think you have to sit still in the boat and tell the positive stories.
But also prepare. I mean, I'm just a moderator, but allow me a small opinion here. Science historians can show us exactly what happens if we do deep transformations, and especially when it's about the energy system. If there wouldn't be any sign of disturbance, aggression, maybe even some type of revolution, we would just scratch the surface. We would not being in the deep transformation. And it sounds hard and academic, but I think that's where it is. And so on top of telling good stories, we just need to be prepared.
Yeah.
There was another question over here.
Johan, congratulations to your work, particularly to the way in which you do that with humility and the way you are always translating grim science into action, and in the way you're actually getting people on their toes. One of the grim realities of 2024 is that we are competing with a massive agenda that is draining resources and that is draining also attention, and that is security. And you already started to talk about that. How do we have to tell the story to make sure that this is being seen as the solution to it? And given that you have already reacted a bit to that, let's take it a bit further. The security is not just on a geopolitical, on a military, on an economic, but also on a very personal level. People feel insecure if they see this chart. How have we as a community failed, and in Rockström language, how can we get out of that to give people an identity in the world that you are describing?
Yeah, no, thanks, Martin. This is a really difficult and important, central, even fundamental question. You know, to begin with, just to flag another, I'm kind of flagging a lot of failures today, and I'll just throw out one more, which is that we tend too quickly to load responsibility on the shoulders of individuals. And I think your point, Antje, that these are system errors. I mean, it's about large infrastructure, it is governance systems, it's institutions, it's the whole logic in the economy. It's urgent, so we cannot replace the economy with something new. We have to make the current system work for us. And I think, therefore, one way of getting citizens on board and to get them enthusiastically engaged is if they feel that they can trust across scales that things are actually happening and moving in the right direction. When I interact with youth in the Friday for Future movement, by the way, when the Friday for Future went global, which was literally when Ottmar and I took office in 2018, we immediately called Luisa Neubauer and Greta Thunberg and sent down an electric car to Berlin and brought them up to PIC and had a closed session with scientists at PIC to be able to just update them on the science. And my take on the youth is that they are not scared by the science. They're scared about the inaction by the adult leaders. And I think that is the area we need to really zoom in on, that system changes at this scale requires regulatory means. I mean, you can't imagine how many times Ottmar Edenhofer reminds me, sure, you have these fantastic exponential curves of positive change, but remember, they're so far only meeting growing demand. You're not bending the curve on oil, coal, and gas. You need to have systematic regulatory frameworks. And I think citizens in general lose hope, not isolated on the planetary science, not isolated on innovations that we see in some sectors or some geographies, or fantastic work in Copenhagen, isn't Amsterdam great, Costa Rica is really moving on an exciting line. No, they understand that this has to add up. This has to add up at the global level. If China just continues, if India goes on the wrong way, if Nigeria doesn't decouple, if South Africa continues, you just talk about Namibia. I mean, I think that's the big question. That's why we would want Antonio Guterres to start with the planet when you talk about the future. Because we are, I mean, I think this is a kind of a long story, and Catherine was there when, I think one of the biggest failures when we went from the Kyoto Protocol and the efforts in Copenhagen in 2009 at COP15 and the Paris Agreement is that we introduced this voluntary dimension, that it's up to any country to do whatever they want. I mean, within the chapeau of the framework. And while the Kyoto Protocol, as you remember, had an Annex 1 and Annex 2 with quantitative numbers, and every country had a number. It was too low, but they had to abide to it. It was compulsory. And my view is at least that we need stronger top-down governance, guided democratically, guided by science, to give confidence for citizens that it's worth for me to take the bike to work. Because I feel confidence that across scales, the leaders are actually pushing ourselves in the right direction. Now, I think many people feel it's pointless to do anything. What's the point that I do anything if everyone else is doing the wrong thing? And I think that's one of those parts that, what can we do about that? Question mark.
We have a question in the back here. Okay. Hi, with one the pots.
Johan, congratulations and thanks for your talk, which is super inspiring. I'm also from PIC, and I have this small question on like the interactions between the different dimensions of the planetary boundaries, because like the Earth is an open system, and it has this self-regulating capacity. And there was like this Gaia hypothesis, which says that like the Earth is just like a living organism, and it can like self-regulate itself. But the problem is that there is very complex interactions between the different components of the different spheres, different part of the Earth, and there might be involved these huge like nonlinear effects. So I would like to ask, like, how do you conceive like this complexity of the interactions between the different components of the Earth? Because I think this will be very important for the PB framework. Thank you.
No, thanks. I mean, you're pointing again your finger on the frontier of science, as we've been discussing, that the uncertainty ranges across all the planetary boundaries are largely due to our still not fully understanding interactions and complexities between boundaries. I find it, to be honest, very worrying, for example, that we don't even have the numbers on how much loss of biodiversity, deforestation, and freshwater change can the Amazon basin tolerate under different climate forcing. So we don't know that balance. We know that the Amazon is at 17% deforestation and 1.2 degrees Celsius warming. But we don't know what combination is a dangerous one. There are scientific efforts, and PIC colleagues are doing a lot of work there. But I think we need to take that interactions work from the global level, but also to the critical biome level, and will certainly be an area that will require more research, which will help us to give even more precision on the boundaries. But you're right that, I mean, it should be acknowledged that the safe boundary on climate is set there largely assuming that you're not destroying the biosphere boundaries. If you would totally transgress and cross tipping points on land and biosphere integrity, what happens with the climate boundary? Well, of course, it will, the safety of that may not even be reachable, or it will change. And this is an area where we're doing quite a lot of research. I would like to close by saying, though, and this is something that we academics also need always to fight with ourselves of, let's not, as we often do, let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Because it's quite fantastic that we have enough evidence to run with science-based targets on biodiversity. I mean, we have 15 years of planetary boundary science. We have 4 control variables. You can just pick it and go. It's not perfect because your question is valid. But I think we cannot sit still and say, let's wait until we've done the model into comparison and 10 ESM models and get a perfect probability assessment of sensitivities, and then we'll show the final result. So I think there's a journey here as well.
And then we have the 1 or 2 final questions. Just 1? 2. Okay, 2. 1 over here and then 1 over there. Please.
Thank you. My name is Naoko Ishii, the Center for Global Commons, and congratulations, Johan, on this significant award. And we have initiated the Global Commons Dialogue a few years ago, so it's your victory is also the community's victory, and we are very pleased about it. Scientific community has made such a significant progress, and now what's more, you have communicated so well to the community or to the globe. Where we are failing is more like a solution space, as very clear from the questions already asked. So we need quite a significant action lever to realize transformation, at least for carbon space. That government have started to put a price on carbon. What's going on in nature space? Yes, it's good that we have now the nature goal, global nature goal, but we really haven't had a clear action lever to realize nature positive economy. One idea we have been debating internally with friends is could it be possible to put the value of natural capital in that way? There are a lot of initiatives to put a quantitative value on the natural capital. Is that anyway possible to put even monetary value on the natural capital? I know it's a huge, it's very sensitive question, that because we all know that the role played by indigenous community, and they may not really like to even think about the price on natural capital. But without putting the monetary value on the natural capital, can we really transform our economic system towards nature positive economy? It's a sensitive, maybe political question, but I'm very interested in seeking your view on that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a big topic, Naoko. By the way, it's thanks to Naoko Ishii that planetary boundary science is so well, let's say, recognized in Japan. I think you've translated 2 books in Japanese on planetary boundary science, so that's just incredible. To begin with, much of the economic science focus that Ottmar Edenhofer and colleagues at PIC lead is largely on climate economics. But we are increasingly really looking into also the economics of natural capital and how to to provide economic research evidence of how to most efficiently have policy measures that can put an economic value on natural capital. But it's really, as you point out yourself, it's a really complicated area, because if you start pumping in capital to preserve or conserve natural capital, the question is what actors then step in to invest in that. But I think, I mean, you're sitting next to Martin Stuchley with the Land Bank initiative, which I think is one of the most innovative ways of trying to put economic value on investments in land. So I think this is an area that we need, in parallel with the price on carbon, on the black carbon, we also need a value of natural capital in nature and how to advance that.
Thank you. And now the truly final question goes to you. Have a microphone.
Very much. Congratulations, Professor. My question is a little bit more political, but we are seeing that some of the solutions that are being proposed in the context of planetary commons is the creation of global institutions, right? But there's massive political, opposition to this, and we've seen votes in the United Nations with 140 countries supporting an idea, but then one veto and from one specific country, and this idea goes away. What is the strategy to bring up institutions such as the International Court for the Environment, or the GEA, the Global Environmental Agency? How are you approaching this, or what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so no, thanks for the question, and let me throw out an idea of a paper that we'd like to work on. So if anyone is interested, perhaps you might be interested. Because I find another one of the untapped potentials is that when we present the planet boundary science, it generally comes across a bit as utopia. You measure the planet, but how could we govern the planet? And I think we need a systematic assessment of all the institutions and governance mechanisms and policies across each of the 9 boundaries that we already today have. Because it's a kind of underestimated that when you think of it, climate has the UNFCCC. We have the whole CBD, the UN CBD for biodiversity. We've had several big summits on fresh water. You could argue that the critical load policies on novel entities in different regions are actually institutions that are there. For ozone, we have the Montreal Protocol, and it's been one of those global institutional mechanisms that have actually succeeded. We were in the red and came back into the safe space, thanks to policy listening to science. And by the way, giving 3 Nobel Prizes along the way. So I think we need to start demystifying governing the planet by bringing forward the good examples that, when you think of it, you're actually kind of governing the planet already today. And so get on with it.
Get on with it is the key point.
That's the key. Yeah, thanks.
I think you have to get up and go.
You're fantastic. You're so great. So great.
Well, thank you very much, Johan, and thanks for your excellent questions. And may I now call Julia back on stage. Thank you.
Takes a lot of courage to come up to the stage after all that, and I'm not going to make a speech. But first of all, Johan, we buckled up. That's what you told us to do at the beginning. Now we're very disciplined. Everybody buckled up, and we had the courage to listen to all of the challenges, and then your last word was get on with it. And I think that's where we are right now. So you've given us so much hope about, you could have come here. First of all, we could have all stayed in bed this morning to say, this is just, nothing is going to happen. We have crossed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, and you haven't lost hope. Neither has anybody else here. So it's extremely important for us to take this message with us, that we have decided not to stay in bed, that we haven't given up hope. We are getting on with it. And some of the tools for that require really a leadership systems thinking. Communicate clearly. Most of us in the scientific world did not get that as a part of our education. And that's so important. I don't know how you figured it out, but you do it brilliantly. To be courageous, to be persistent, that's super important. This is all about leadership. How are we going to get on with it? We can't just say we're going to do it. We have to do it in a systemic way. Certainly, to get back to that last issue, how do we have the courage and the possibility to link the disciplines that don't talk to each other and getting out of our comfort zone? You know how to do all that, and you're giving the message. And I just want to say I'm super proud of the Tyler Prize, obviously, but I'm very proud that we have selected you and that your message, hopefully this has helped, but we are committed to making sure that we all get on with it in a systematic, intelligent way. And humanity will survive in a planet not only for us, but for future generations. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Johan. Thank you, Antje. And let's continue to get on with it in the most systematic and intelligent way. Thank you all very much for being here.